Welcome back, everybody. This is Modern Randy. I am Randy, and today we're breaking down the standard metagame yet again. This time, seeing what's winning, what's losing, what's doing well, and what is shaking up the meta. As always, guys, if you like what I'm doing, you like what you're seeing, go ahead and leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything. It really helps me out. And let me know what you guys are taking to your standard RCQs. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you guys are doing, what you guys are trying out. Starting off with the first challenge that happened on Friday, the 22nd, we had 6 Golgari mid-range, 5 Gruul Prowess, 5 Domain, 4 Mono Red, 3 Dimir mid-range, 2 Boros Burn, 2 Orzhov mid-range, 2 of the Rug Floodcaller deck, 1 Bant Tempo, 1 Caretakers, and 1 red-green Urabrask deck. So just kind of breaking down some quickly, it looks like Golgari and Dimir mid-range tend to be still the 2 most popular mid-range decks to take. We see Mono Red, Burn, Gruul Prowess, all these aggro decks are still putting up massive amounts of numbers. Aggro is still very much alive and well, and probably one of the best things to be doing in Standard. This is no surprise. Just kind of taking a little, going over these a little bit. The Bant Tempo deck is just the Azorius Oculus deck that's running around. It was playing a couple green cards in it. It wasn't anything too special, but it got called Bant Tempo, just so you guys are aware of that. The red-green Urabrask deck is a deck running the 4-mana Urabrask, where whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 1 damage to the opponent. It was doing a bunch of ways to just play a bunch of much more heavier burn with 4 of those. Just playing the green really for Seek the Beast, the Questing Druid card was the real reason why I was playing green, just to kind of go over that in case you guys are curious. But overall, nothing too surprising here. Golgari mid-range seems to be pulling ahead as a whole between the Dimir mid-range, Golgari mid-range argument of which one you should be playing. Moving on. Almost forgot. The red-green Prowess deck, Gruul Prowess did take down the challenge. Not really anything too surprising. Biggest shock here now is pretty much all these aggro decks, all these mono red, Gruul, Prowess decks, Boros decks are all playing now for Screaming Nemesis, and if you've looked at the price of Screaming Nemesis, you'll know why it's so expensive. Pretty much Screaming Nemesis has been found out as it's the best card in these decks, basically. It's essentially a 3 mana, has to eat a removal spell that doesn't damage it, or it's just 3 free damage a turn, which is kind of crazy. Its ability to turn off life gain is huge. It's basically what's shutting down any deck that has life gain ability. So not too surprising, but yeah, moving forward, pretty much any of the aggro decks you see is going to be playing for Screaming Nemesis. Moving forward, it's just a hell of a card. If you don't have them yet, either swallow your pride and have to buy them, or learn how to beat them. Those are your options at this point. But yeah, Screaming Nemesis is going nowhere, and I imagine it will be here as long as it is in Standard. Going on to the next one, now that we got that out of the way, we had 11 Golgari mid-range decks, followed by 8 Dimir mid-range decks, then 4 of the Gruul Prowess decks, and then a bunch of one-ofs. We had Green White Enchantment, Mono Red, Mono Black, Bant Tempo, Jeskai Convoke, Rakdos Aggro, Caretakers, the Red Green Urabrask deck again, and then a Dimir Zombify deck. So clearly, people are still wanting to play Golgari and Dimir midrange. Not too surprising there that they were the 2 most popular decks by a wide margin. That being said, Golgari did take it down to kind of no surprise there at that point. This is almost a stock version of the list at this point. Going forward, we're seeing, obviously the 4 elves is the biggest thing, and they've moved on to the 4 unholy annexes along with the 4 Archfiend of the Dross, really running that demon package, if you will. It turns out that going turn 2 unholy annex is just pretty much good against every deck besides mono red. So not too surprising. It gives you an edge in the mid-range grind decks. It gives you an edge against the control decks. It gives you an edge against any other aggro deck besides the burn prowess decks. And even that's not too crazy, being able to go, turn 3 into a 6/6, then now you're gaining 2 life a turn instead of losing 2 life a turn. But it is not too surprising. I do think this is the best deck to play if you wanted to play a mid-range strategy. That being said, it does still lose to the mono red decks, the Gruul decks, things like that. It's not the end all be all. This is not the best deck in the format by, you know, a wide margin by any means. I just think it is the best mid-range deck to be playing. That being said, this deck still can lose to like the Caretaker Challenge decks are running around. Dimir can still get underneath it if it needs to. Domain can obviously go over top of it as a whole too. So it's not too crazy to see this deck lose. I just think it is a very well-rounded mid-range deck, which is what you want your mid-range deck to be. Well-rounded and have a game against everything. So not too surprising to see this deck continuously to do well. And like I said, I think it is the best mid-range deck if you're wanting to play one. It's also relatively cheap to build. None of these cards are super expensive. I mean, I think Unholy Annex is the most expensive card in this deck at this point. Obviously, if they start to go more towards some Shieldreds and things like that, that's going to get pricey really quick, because Shieldred has yet to see any kind of real price drop at all. So won't be too surprising to see that happen either. Moving on to the second challenge on Saturday, we had 6 Golgari mid-range decks, 5 Gruul Prowess decks, 5 Domain decks, 4 Mono Red decks, 3 Dimir mid-range decks, 2 Boros Burn decks, 2 Orzhov mid-range deck, 2 of that Rug Floodcaller deck, that combo deck, 1 of the Bant Tempo deck, 1 Caretakers, and then 1 of the Red-Green Herbras deck as well. So, once again, Golgari putting up the most numbers in the challenge, as well as putting up the most numbers for the mid-range strategies. Obviously, aggro as a whole was putting up more numbers than anything. If you combine the Gruul Prowess with Mono Red, with Boros Spurn, you know, that's way more than just the 6 copies of Golgari midrange. So not too surprising there. And I think the more we see Golgari midrange keep popping up, I think Gruul Prowess will pop up more, because Golgari has all those spot removal spells. Gruul does really well against that by having all the reactionary spells to give your creature hexproof, give it protection, and kind of like not 2 for 1 because you're 2 for 1 yourself, but like being able to protect your creature and throw the Golgari game plan off, you know, where it doesn't have its efficient removal, because your one drop protection spell is better than its 2-drop removal spell type situation. So I think we're going to see more Gruul Prowess moving forward if Golgari midrange stays at the top of the midrange strategies and things of that nature. Notably, I think the Rug Floodcaller deck, the Temur Floodcaller deck, however you want to say that, I think that deck is starting to really fall off. It's still putting up numbers, it's still not gone anywhere, but I do wonder if that was more of a flash in the pan than people thought it was going to be. I'm curious to see if it's going to ever, you know, really take up or go well, or maybe it's just losing now because a lot of people have figured out, you know, how to play against it. That being said, Dimir midrange did actually take down the tournament, though, despite, if we go back to it, only having, you know, 3 copies here in the top 32. It did take it down as a whole. Notably, they have started playing like a Shieldreds to help, you know, with the life gain problem against Mono Red. Unstoppable Slasher has started making their way into this deck list as well, which I think is really good. I think it gives a big damage boost to the deck. I think it's something the deck needed, because yeah, it's great that you played a bunch of, like, you know, 1 and 2 drop creatures, you interrupted your opponent a little bit, you're drawing a bunch of cards with Enduring Curiosity, but if you're not beating them down fast enough, they can kind of get out from underneath that. You know, it's great that you drew a bunch of cards, but if your cards aren't doing a whole bunch, like if you draw, you know, a couple more Spygrass Sirens, a couple more things that just aren't really putting away the game, that doesn't help you. It just, you drew a bunch of extra cards, you know. And with Mono Red, or with the Red Prowess decks being so popular, the Burn decks being so popular, it's not too surprising to see this deck kind of pivot a little bit more to having a Shieldred in the main, along with 2 on the sideboard, having the Unstoppable Slasher here in the main, being able to again push that damage through, give a little life gain, get a little life gain going. It makes sense. I'm not too surprised to see this happen. Still think this deck is very well. Like I said, I think that the Golgari does what it's doing better. Essentially, I think it has just a better game plan as a whole. Now, obviously, people are going to argue with me, say this is better, say what else is better. That's just my opinion. As always, I can be wrong. I never claim to be the most correct person, or to be correct or right all the time, clearly. But I do think that if you want to take a mid-range deck, that Golgari is your better option to build into. Now, obviously, if you like Dimir, or you want to play Dimir, or you have a particular reason to play this deck, go for it. By no means am I going to ever stop someone from playing a deck that they want to play. Just if you're trying to take down your next RCQ, I think Golgari is probably your better option. Or one of the Mono Red, or I guess not Mono Red, but one of the Prowess decks too. They're just super fast, lean, and efficient. Moving on to the Sunday challenge, then we had 9 Dimir mid-range decks. Apparently people wanted to prove me wrong. Dimir is popular, they said. Going into Golgari with 6, then Mono Red with 4, Gruul Prowess with 3, Azorius Aggro with 2, Simic Tempo with 2, Rug Flood Color with 2, Domain with 1, a 4-color Reanimator with 1, Mono Black with 1, and Orzhov Midrange having 1 copy. So, again, once again, Domir and Golgari fighting neck and neck to have the most copies. Not too surprising there. Once again, Mono Red, Gruul still putting up massive amounts of numbers. They had, seven red aggro decks here in the top 32. Not too surprising. The Simic Tempo deck is at kind of like that almost budget deck running around, which is kind of interesting to see. It put up some numbers. I haven't really seen that anywhere but Arena. The Rug deck still putting up numbers. Obviously not doing that well as a whole, but we did have Mono Red taken down overall, and this is kind of, I think, going to be one of the more stock or go-to lists moving forward. It's super efficient. It's super well. It does everything that you want it to do. With it being having 12 1-drops. Your great 8 2-drops here with Manifold Mouse being kind of huge, being able to trigger that Valorant. 4 Screaming Nemesis, like I said, I think this is just going to be what you're going to see moving forward. You're not going to see more, any less than that, essentially. And obviously, Burst Lightning has taken over the place of Shock will ever do. The biggest thing moving forward, though, is seeing Sunspine, the Sunspine coming in and seeing more play in the sideboards as a whole. Kind of interesting to see that moving forward. Interesting to see if that's going to be the case moving forward, or maybe this is just a new flash in the pan iteration. We'll see what happens as a whole, but it's cool to see that kind of like the deck still taking on new iterations, still sideboard getting figured out, things like that. So interesting to see as a whole. Now, when we take out and break down this as a whole for the weekend, we see that Golgari did have more copies than Dimir as a whole, with 29 compared to 23. And then Gruul Prowess had 17, Mono Red had 13, Domain had 11. The Red Flood Color deck did put up 6, Orzhov Midrange with 5, Boros Burn with 5. That Red-Green Urabrask deck putting up 3. Caretaker's Talent only having 3 copies. When we look at last week, where it had, I think it was 10 or 12 copies, really got a downswing from there. I think the biggest problem the Caretaker's Talent, the Mono White Caretaker's deck has, is that it's very slow, it's very grindy. So that's not a bad thing per se. The biggest problem it has is that it can lose the aggro deck still. It has a good game against them for the most part, but now that all the aggro decks, or all the red aggro decks, are on forward Screaming Nemesis, that matchup has become a lot worse. Especially if you play against anybody who understands how that matchup works. They'll wait until they can, play Screaming Nemesis with a mana up and just hold up a bolt or not a bolt, sorry, but a shock for their Screaming Nemesis. So as soon as you go to gain life, they'll in response trigger it, so that way you don't gain the life, and then it just makes that matchup a lot harder to close out the game. I will say that that's the biggest problem Caretaker's Talent deck has, is it doesn't have a fast clock or a fast way to close out the game. So I'm just kind of waiting. I'm waiting to see if Caretaker's Talent ever gets a good way to clear out the game or close out the game really fast. I think that deck will instantly become a lot better. I think that's the biggest downfall that deck has right now, is it just doesn't have a good way to close out the game. So kind of curious to see what's going to happen with that deck. I'm kind of curious to see what people iterate on that. I'm trying to do a couple different things with the deck as well and see if I can't make something happen with it. But we'll see what comes out of that. 3 of the Bant Tempo decks, which is just the blue-white Azorius Oculus deck. Mono Black put up 2 numbers, Azorius Aggro put up 2 numbers, that Civic Temple deck put up 2 numbers, and then a couple of different one-ofs. So, nothing has really changed, I will say, per se. Golgari Midrange is definitely taking up a larger meta share as a whole moving forward. But obviously, the aggro decks are really taking up the most meta share when you look at, if you combine all the red aggro decks together, there's 30 copies of those compared to Golgari Midrange. Still had 29, which is almost 30 of them for all these top 32s. So I think we're seeing a lot more Golgari Midrange running around. We're seeing a lot more aggro decks running around. I think that you really need to have a game plan for the aggressive decks game 1. That is, I think, what you're going to see a lot of moving forward in your RCQs or any of your 1Ks or anything you're going to, or planning to go to, essentially. Like, just aggro is here, it's here to stay. Screaming Nemesis is a hell of a magic card, and you need to have a game plan for it, and Life Gain is not necessarily that game plan, because Screaming Nemesis does so much work against that. It's unreal, honestly. It's unreal what Screaming Nemesis can do and how well it is positioned in this format. So it'll be interesting to see and move forward on what happens with the aggro decks and what decks have what the game plan comes for trying to deal with Screaming Nemesis. Because it can eat a removal spell, sure, but That's not their only creature. That's not the only thing they're doing. That's not the only thing they have a plan for. So I do think that if you are planning to go to any RCQs anytime in the near future, you got to have a game plan here for the Screaming Nemesis red decks. And then on top of that, you need to have a game plan for what you're doing against the mid-range decks, whether you're trying to grind with them 1-for-1 or what you're trying to do. You need to have a game plan for both. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward with the metagame. But I do think that, like, right now, if you're looking to take anything to the RCQ, I'd be working on either picking up Golgari mid-range, learning that deck, or picking up one of the I keep wanting to say mono red, one of the red aggro decks running around. Whether you want to play Gruul, Boros, mono red, whatever's in your budget, whatever in your wheelhouse, I think that's your best bet right now to take down any of the RCQs running or happening. Anything that you want to try to get qualified for, definitely take one of those red aggro decks. They can get underneath the Golgari mid-range decks. They can play a little bit of a long game with them. And if you ever trigger Screaming Nemesis against these decks, you never have to worry about them gaining life again, which makes it a huge deal for you. You know, you're not worried about, oh, okay, I got him down to like 5 life, and then go, oh, I gained 4 or 5 life, and the turn it's like, well, you can't do that anymore. So it does hurt these decks a lot. The Screaming Nemesis is just one hell of a Magic card. We did also have a standard showcase this weekend as well. Dimir Midrange did put up 6 copies in the top 32. Mono Red with 4, Gruul Palace with 3, Golgari Midrange with 3, Domain with 3. Notably, it was Azorius Tempo with 2. We also had 2 Dimir Demons deck, 2 Jeskai Convoke, 2 Esper Reanimator, 1 of the Floodcaller decks, 2 of the Caretaker Talent, 1 Simic Tempo, and 1 Azorius Control. So this time it looked like Dimir Midrange put up the most copies, which isn't too surprising. I still think the deck is very popular, still has a lot of options. Like I said, I'm still a big fan of the Gruul Prowess, or Golgari Prowess, Golgari Midrange. The Golgari Midrange deck is much where I would rather be for midrange strategies. But that being said, it's not too surprising to see, again, the aggro deck kind of putting up the most copies as a whole, with 8 of those between Mono Red and Gruul Prowess. Notably, we have not seen a whole bunch of Boros running around, which I thought we would see more of, especially with the printing of Boros Charm into Standard. But it turns out Boros Charm may just not be needed. Just you need some Screaming Nemesis and some other little red creatures to get the job done. That being said, Mono Red did take down this tournament as well, and if you notice, this is almost an exact copy of our last challenge on Sunday, was playing this exact list as well. So it's not too surprising. Like I said, I think this is going to be the Nemesis moving forward, no pun intended with that Screaming Nemesis. Just these red aggro decks are so powerful and so popular, it's not too surprising to see. They have just, a lot of power, they have a lot of utility. Emberheart Challenger being able to just get you extra card advantage here with the Manifold Mouse, with your Rockface Village. It just makes sense. I'm not too surprised to see these decks doing so well, honestly. But as always, guys, if you like what you're seeing and like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on this video. Let me know what you guys plan to take to your RCQs, how you plan to take down the Red Menace decks that are running around, and I'll catch you guys next time.